The first note didn't just ring through the ballroom, it cut through it. Crystal glasses stopped halfway to painted lips. A silver fork slipped from somebody's hand and hit a china plate with a tiny, embarrassed click. At the front of the room, under the gold wash of chandelier light, a 13-year-old black boy in a borrowed suit pressed one key on a concert grand piano, and a room full of wealthy strangers forgot how to breathe. Just 30 seconds earlier, one of the richest men in Atlanta had leaned down, looked that same boy up and down, and said in a voice cold enough to freeze the whole night, "You do not belong here." He thought he was correcting a mistake. Protecting the room, preserving standards. What he didn't know, what nobody in that ballroom knew yet, was that the next few minutes would expose his arrogance, shake his reputation, and leave every single witness asking the same question. Who was asterisk this boy? And why did the first note sound like justice? Because this story didn't begin in that ballroom. It began weeks earlier, in a part of the city most of those people had never set foot in, with a boy who had every reason to be bitter, and somehow chose dignity instead. Malik Carter was 13 years old, lived on the west side of Atlanta, and had already learned the kind of silence most adults spend a lifetime trying to survive. Not the peaceful kind. Not the early morning kind, not the silence of rest, the heavy kind. The silence that hung over a kitchen table when the electricity bill was due in 4 days, and there were $19 in the drawer. The silence in the apartment hallway when rent week came around and neighbors stopped making eye contact. The silence in his mother's face when she smiled for him and his little sister before leaving for another double shift, then stood alone by the front door for 2 extra seconds just to breathe. Malik noticed those silences. He noticed everything. Every morning he woke up before sunrise, usually around 5:12, before his alarm had the chance to buzz. The apartment was small enough that he had memorized its sounds. The soft hiss of the radiator that only worked when it felt like it, the refrigerator's tired hum. The occasional bus braking outside on Joseph E. Boone Boulevard, and from the next room the rustle of his little sister Nia turning in her sleep. He never jumped out of bed. He rose carefully, like the morning itself could be disturbed. He'd pull on sweatpants, rinse his face in cold water, and step into the kitchen where the fluorescent light buzzed overhead with that faint electrical whine old apartments seemed to collect. He would put bread in the toaster if there was bread, oatmeal on the stove if there was oatmeal. If there was neither, he improvised crackers and apple. A peanut butter sandwich cut in two so Nia would think it looked intentional. He packed her lunch before he packed his own. That was Malik, not because anyone told him to. Not because there was applause waiting for him, but because somewhere along the way, without ceremony and without permission, he had become the kind of boy who carried what needed carrying. His mother, Tasha Carter, worked as a nursing assistant at Grady Memorial and cleaned office suites downtown 2 evenings a week when the hospital's schedule got light. She was 34, always tired, always moving, and somehow still the kind of woman who bent down to listen when a child spoke to her. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. So she had become expert at breaking in private. Malik knew that too. He knew the difference between her real smile and the one she wore like armor. He knew when her feet hurt because she stood with one hip tilted a little higher than the other. He knew when she'd skipped lunch because her voice got softer by 8 o'clock. He knew when she was pretending not to worry, because on those nights she wiped the same counter 3 times. And he loved her with the fierce, wordless loyalty of a boy who had seen too much and said too little. Then there was Nia, 8 years old, stubborn, bright, gap-toothed, and convinced her brother could do anything. She told kids at school Malik could fix radios, outrun dogs, and talk to birds. 2 of those things were false. One was debatable. What he could do was play music, not the polished kind people wore tuxedos around, not at first. His first piano had not been a piano at all. It had been a broken keyboard missing 2 black keys and a battery cover, rescued from the storage closet of New Mercy Baptist Church by Miss Evelyn Brooks, the church pianist and unofficial neighborhood historian. She was 68, sharp-eyed, caramel-skinned, and carried herself with the stubborn grace of a woman who had been underestimated so many times she had stopped finding it interesting. Miss Evelyn said Malik had hands that listened before they touched. He was 9 the first time she noticed him hovering beside the keyboard after choir rehearsal, not speaking, just watching the shape of her fingers. Most kids slapped keys and laughed at the noise. Malik watched patterns, waited for meaning. When she got up to fetch sheet music, he repeated the final chord progression almost perfectly on a keyboard that buzzed like a cheap radio. She came back, stared at him for a full 3 seconds and said, "Baby, who taught you that?" Malik had shrugged. "You did." That was the beginning. Lessons became routine, Tuesdays after school. Thursday evenings if the church wasn't using the fellowship hall. Saturdays whenever Miss Evelyn could unlock the side door. She taught him scales, discipline, posture, touch, and patience. But more than that, she taught him that talent without self-respect was a gift people would try to steal from you. "Don't ever beg to be seen," she told him once, tapping the side of the dusty upright piano with one knuckle. "You learn, you prepare. And when the moment comes, let the work speak." Malik remembered that line because it sounded like something bigger than music. By 13, he had moved from repetition to expression. He didn't just play songs, he understood them. He heard the sadness between notes, the hope tucked inside certain major chords, the ache in unfinished phrases. He could take an old hymn Miss Evelyn had played 1,000 times and make it sound like somebody surviving something in real time. Even when he practiced in a sanctuary with a leaky ceiling and 3 sticking keys, there was something unmistakable about him. Not flashy, not showy, but undeniable. Still, talent didn't cancel reality. He went to Douglas Middle School where the band room had broken stands and no piano worth naming. He wore hand-me-down shoes polished so carefully they almost passed for new. He got teased sometimes, not always cruelly, but enough. For carrying sheet music in a grocery bag when his backpack zipper broke. For turning down pickup games to practice. For being church serious. For not acting impressed by kids whose fathers had louder cars. He took it, mostly quietly, not because he was weak, because he was focused. You might be wondering why a boy like Malik didn't speak up more often. Why he let so many comments pass. Why he didn't throw their laughter back at them. The answer is simple and painful. He had already figured out something a lot of grown people never learn. Not every fight deserves your energy, but every dream does asterisk. And Malik had a dream, not a childish, floating wish, a real one. Sharp enough to hurt, he wanted to study piano seriously. Composition, too. He wanted to leave behind something beautiful enough that people who had never met him could still feel him. He wanted to buy his mother a house with quiet in it. He wanted Nia to grow up in rooms where she never had to wonder whether the lights would stay on. He wanted, in the deepest and most private part of himself, to become the kind of musician his late father would have understood, because there had been a father once. Isaiah Carter, tall, gentle. A bus mechanic by trade, a trumpet player by soul. He died when Malik was 7 after a stroke no one saw coming. But he had left behind a milk crate filled with cassette tapes, church programs, scribbled chord charts, and one black notebook full of unfinished melodies. Sometimes late at night, Malik opened that notebook like scripture. There were bars of music that stopped midway down the page, notes circled, arrows, small comments in the margin. Try softer here, leave space, truth before volume. Malik didn't fully remember his father's voice, but he remembered that line, truth before volume. And somewhere between grief and practice, the boy began turning those fragments into something of his own. That would matter later, more than anyone knew. Because a few miles across the city, people were preparing for a night built on image, prestige, and appearances. And not one of them was ready for Malik Carter. Atlanta could be 2 different cities depending on where you stood. There was the city of polished glass towers, valet stands, rooftop parties, charity galas, and names that opened doors. The city where art was discussed over imported wine and philanthropy came with photographers. And then there was the other Atlanta, the one where church basements doubled as rehearsal spaces, where mothers stretched one grocery bag into 4 meals, where children learned not to call home during work hours unless it was urgent, where beauty showed up unannounced, in storefront gospel, in porch conversations, in drums on buckets, in grandmothers humming over stove burners. Malik lived in that Atlanta. But through Miss Evelyn, he had started glimpsing the other one. Every year, the Belmont Conservatory of Music held a competition called the Langston Young Artists Fellowship. It was prestigious. Selective, The kind of opportunity families in wealthy zip codes prepared for years in advance with private tutors, competition circuits, tailored portfolios, and summer intensives. The fellowship offered full pre-college tuition, mentoring, instrument access, and most importantly for kids like Malik, visibility. Doors that usually stayed closed. Miss Evelyn had heard about the program for years and dismissed it with a snort. Too much silk in those hallways, she liked to say. Not enough soul. But 6 months earlier, Belmont had changed part of the process. First-round audio submissions would be judged blind. No names, no schools, no photographs, just music. When Miss Evelyn heard that, she looked across the church at Malik, who was bent over the upright piano repeating a passage until it sounded less like effort and more like memory. Maybe silk can be educated, she murmured, so they applied, not with polished videos and studio microphones. With an old borrowed recorder, a church piano that needed tuning, and a boy in a pressed shirt sitting as straight as if the world had already made room for him. Only instead of submitting a standard classical piece, Malik asked if he could include an original composition. Miss Evelyn stared at him. "You wrote one?" He nodded shyly. "On that notebook from your daddy?" Another nod. She listened in silence while he played it for her the next Saturday. When he finished, she did not speak right away. She removed her glasses. Wiped them, put them back on. Then she said very softly, "Baby, this is not normal." Not genius. She would never flatter him that way, but not normal. The piece was called *First Light*. It began with a hesitant, almost fragile phrase, like somebody looking around in the dark, and built into a progression so hopeful it felt earned instead of easy. It carried gospel roots, classical discipline, and something else too, something raw, something lived in. Miss Evelyn sent in both recordings, one standard repertoire piece and one original. Then they waited. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Then, on a Thursday evening while Tasha was heating canned soup and Nia was doing math at the table, an email came to Miss Evelyn's old laptop. Malik had been selected as one of 3 finalists. Not only that, the judges had specifically requested that he perform First Light live at the Fellowship Gala the following month at the Belmont Grand Hall. There would be donors, patrons, board members, press, music faculty, an audience that could change a life. Tasha sat down slowly when she heard, then she cried, not loudly, not dramatically. Just one hand over her mouth and tears slipping through her fingers, while Malik stood there stunned, laptop glow reflected in his eyes. Nia screamed, "My brother's gonna be famous," Miss Evelyn corrected her. "No, baby, famous is cheap. He's about to be *recognized*. And for the first time in a long time, the Carter apartment held a different kind of silence. Not fear, hope, but hope is strange. It doesn't arrive by itself. It brings vulnerability with it. Because once you can see the door, it hurts more when someone tries to shut it. And that is exactly what was waiting at Belmont. The gala was held on a Saturday night in early spring at Belmont's downtown performance hall, a building of polished marble, bronze doors, tall windows, and the kind of hush expensive places train into their walls. Miss Evelyn had loaned Malik a navy suit that had once belonged to her grandson. The sleeves were a little short, the shoulders slightly broad. Tasha had spent an hour steaming it in the bathroom, and another 20 minutes pressing the collar flat with a towel. Malik wore a white shirt, carefully knotted tie, and the cleanest shoes he owned, black worn at the sides but polished until they caught light. He looked young. He also looked ready. The problem was, ready and welcome were not the same thing. Tasha was running late from the hospital. A patient emergency had held her past shift change, and she'd called from the parking deck sounding breathless, apologizing between every sentence. "Go inside, baby, don't wait on me, I'm coming." "I promise I'm coming." Miss Evelyn's car had broken down that afternoon, so she was catching a ride with a deacon from church. That meant Malik arrived alone. A city bus, then a train, then a 10-minute walk past restaurants with gold lettering and valet attendants who didn't bother disguising their surprise when he passed. By the time he reached Belmont, the sidewalk outside was crowded with people stepping out of black SUVs and sleek sedans. Women in gowns, men in dinner jackets, photographers near the entrance. Staff with earpieces. Malik tightened his grip on the worn leather folder under his arm. Inside were his score, his invitation printout, and the notebook page with the original opening motif his father had written years ago. He climbed the front steps. And almost immediately, the room began telling him he had made a mistake. At the door, a volunteer glanced past him twice before asking, "Are you with catering?" Malik answered politely. "No, ma'am." "I'm a finalist for the Langston Fellowship." Her smile did not quite disappear, but it changed shape. "Oh, 1 second." She flagged another staff member, then another. People were moving around him now, not looking directly, but looking enough. Finally, a man in an immaculate tuxedo, silver at the temples, expensive watch glinting beneath the cuff, approached with the practiced irritation of someone unaccustomed to obstacles. This was Harrison Vale, chairman of the Vale Arts Foundation, major Belmont donor, real estate developer, local magazine favorite. A man who funded scholarships, gave interviews about opportunity, and privately believed most people failed because they had not learned how to present themselves properly. He looked Malik over once. The shoes, the suit, the folder, the skin. Then he said it, not loudly, not enough to seem theatrical, just clearly enough for the nearby staff and 2 passing donors to hear. "You do not belong here." Malik felt the words before he processed them, a heat behind the ears, a tightening in the throat. That small, awful sensation of being reduced in public by someone who had already decided what you were worth. He tried to answer. "Sir, I'm here to perform." Harrison lifted one hand. "This is a private fellowship gala. If you're lost, staff can direct you to the service entrance." A couple standing nearby fell quiet. Somebody pretended not to hear. And in that moment, under the chandeliers, with donors walking past and music drifting from inside, Malik Carter understood that the hardest part of the night would not be playing piano. It would be staying standing. What Harrison Vale didn't know was that with those 7 words, he had already made the worst mistake of his evening. Maybe the worst mistake of his career. Because the boy he was trying to remove from the room was not a mistake. He was the reason the room mattered at all, and the humiliation was only beginning. If you've ever been somewhere you were technically invited but emotionally rejected, you know the strange violence of that feeling. Nothing dramatic has happened. No one has shouted. No one has laid hands on you, and yet the message is unmistakable: leave. Malik stood there with his invitation half out of the folder, while 3 people checked a list that should have taken 10 seconds, and somehow took 3 full minutes. Guests flowed around him in a stream of perfume, polished leather, and practiced laughter. He could hear glasses clinking inside the reception hall. A string quartet had started somewhere beyond the lobby. Harrison Vale remained nearby, not because he needed to, but because control interested him. Finally, a young event coordinator with a headset stepped forward. Her name tag read Amelia Frost ***. She was probably in her late 20s, poised, efficient, and already carrying the strained expression of someone trying to keep too many rich people happy at once. "I'm sorry," she said, not quite meeting Malik's eyes. "I'm not seeing your credential packet up front. Could you wait to the side while we verify?" "I have the email," Malik said quietly. He showed her the printed page. She looked at it, frowned, then looked at Harrison. That tiny pause told Malik everything. Harrison spoke first. "Have someone escort him out of the flow of traffic. We can sort it out elsewhere." Elsewhere, not inside, not welcome. Security didn't grab him. That would have been too obvious. Instead, an older guard named Daniel Ruiz stepped up beside Malik and said in a low voice, "Come with me, son. We'll figure it out." Daniel's tone was kind. But kindness doesn't erase humiliation when it comes with relocation. Malik was led away from the main entrance, down a side corridor, toward a smaller waiting area near the coat room where folding chairs had been set against a wall. From where he sat, he could see only slivers of the event through the doorway. Satin dresses, a floral arrangement taller than he was, staff crossing quickly with trays of sparkling water. He texted his mother, "They're checking something. I'm okay." He didn't add the rest. Didn't say a rich man had looked at him and decided he was impossible. Didn't say his hands were shaking. Daniel stood nearby pretending to organize velvet stanchions. After a minute he leaned over and asked softly, "You really a finalist?" "Yes, sir." Daniel studied his face. "Thought so." That almost undid Malik more than the insult had. Because sometimes being believed by one person after being doubted by another feels like the body finally getting permission to keep breathing. Still, the minutes dragged. Inside the ballroom, opening remarks had begun. Malik could hear a man's amplified voice welcoming patrons to an evening dedicated to excellence, opportunity, and the future of American music. The irony landed hard enough to sting. Amelia returned at last with a forced little smile. "We found your registration, Malik. It appears your packet was mistakenly placed with the VIP donor materials." Mistakenly, the word hung there. She handed him a simple performer badge instead of the embossed credential lanyards the other finalists were wearing. "You'll need to use the side artist entrance from this point forward." "The red carpet portion is over anyway." Malik nodded. What else was there to do? As Daniel walked him toward the backstage wing, he passed the open ballroom doors for the first time. Inside were round tables dressed in white linen and gold runners, each glowing beneath candlelight. At the front stood a glossy black Steinway under a spotlight. Behind it, a large screen displayed the words, "BLLMONT Conservatory Langston Young ARTISTS Fellowship Gala." For one fleeting second, Malik forgot everything else. The piano. It looked like possibility made physical. Then a voice at one of the tables cut through. "Which finalist is he with?" Another voice, amused and careless. "Maybe someone's nephew from the kitchen." Laughter, quick, soft, but enough. Malik kept walking. That was scene one. The second came backstage. The artist holding room was less glamorous than the ballroom, but still elegant. Mirrors framed in bulbs, bottled water on a side table, garment racks, and printed programs laid out beside fruit trays. No one seemed hungry enough to touch. Two other finalists were already there. A violinist from Buckhead named Olivia Mercer in a pale blue gown, nervous and kind-eyed. And a pianist named Preston Hale, 17, confident, broad-shouldered, from a private arts academy in Savannah. He wore wealth casually, like air. Both looked up when Malik entered. Olivia smiled first. "Hey, you must be the third finalist." Malik nodded. Preston gave a polite once-over, not openly rude, just surprised. "You're playing piano, too?" "Yes. Original work or standard rep?" "Original." That raised his eyebrows. Before Malik could sit, Harrison Vale appeared in the doorway again. He wasn't supposed to be backstage. Men like him simply treated rules as flexible suggestions. He looked at Malik, then at Amelia, irritation still visible beneath his polished exterior. "This area is for performers," Amelia answered too quickly. "He is a performer." There was a registration mix-up. Harrison's jaw tightened in a way only people paying very close attention would notice. "Oh," he said, "how fortunate." It wasn't the word, it was the tone. Then he added, smiling at no one, "Let's hope standards remain high this evening." Preston looked down. Olivia went very still. Malik said nothing. But what Harrison didn't notice was that his comment had just shifted the room. What had been private humiliation was becoming witnessed behavior, and witnessed behavior has consequences. As the minutes passed, Malik tried to warm up on a small digital keyboard in the corner. Two keys were slightly sticky, nothing like the grand piano outside. He played scales quietly, arpeggios. Chord voicings, a fragment of asterisk first light asterisk. Then he stopped. The upper G on the digital board buzzed faintly out of tune through the cheap speaker. Daniel, standing in the hallway, heard Malik mutter under his breath, "That's flat." A passing piano technician turned. "What you say?" Malik looked up. "The sample, upper G." "It's a little low." The technician frowned, pressed the key himself, listened, then gave Malik a sharper look than before. "Huh, small detail, easy to miss." But what seemed small would matter later. The third humiliation arrived not from Harrison, but from the environment he created. A woman with donor tags stepped into the holding room carrying a clipboard and glanced at Malik. "Sweetheart, can you take these programs to table 7? She said it automatically, assuming service. Before Malik could answer, Olivia said, "He's a finalist." The woman blinked, embarrassed for half a second, then covered it with a laugh. "Oh, of course, sorry." Sorry was offered. But not absorbed, because the damage of being repeatedly missing doesn't come from any one moment. It comes from accumulation. Every day, same correction. Every day, same assumption. Every day, same little cut. Malik knew that rhythm, but there was more at stake tonight than pride. This fellowship could mean lessons he could never afford, access to rehearsal spaces, industry connections, a school pathway, a future his neighborhood didn't get handed for free, so he kept his back straight, He answered politely. He stayed. That alone was an act of strength. But Harrison Vale was not done, because some people don't just misjudge you once. They need to be right about you. They need the story they told themselves to hold. And Harrison had already decided what Malik represented. Disorder, embarrassment, a crack in the image, so he started pushing harder. The first official performances began a little after 7:30. Olivia went first, her violin trembling only in the seconds before she started. Once she played, the nerves melted into discipline. The applause was generous. Preston followed with a polished interpretation of Rachmaninoff that had the audience murmuring approvingly before the final chord had fully decayed. Then there was a delay. Malik's. Amelia entered the holding room with a tablet clutched against her chest. "We need to make a small adjustment to the order." Preston looked up. "Again?" She forced a smile. "Just a timing issue." Malik understood instantly. "I'm next, right?" Amelia hesitated. That told him enough. "There's a donor recognition segment being moved up," she said, "and Mr. Vale feels it may be smoother if we bring in a guest performance first." "Before my round?" Malik asked, just briefly. In other words, wait. Again, he nodded, but something in his chest sank. Tasha still hadn't arrived. Her last text had come 12 minutes earlier. Parking, running, don't worry, he wanted to believe her, he really did. But the longer the night stretched, the more he felt the event happening around him instead of with him. At 8 o'clock, Harrison himself entered. "Change of plans," he announced, like the room belonged to him more than the institution did. "The gala has donors here from New York and Chicago, and we need to keep the evening flowing professionally. Miss Frost, let's avoid unpredictable transitions." His eyes flicked to Malik on the word unpredictable. Amelia swallowed. "We have his score and the judges. The judges can hear him after dessert if necessary." After dessert. As if Malik were an inconvenience to be fit between courses. Preston finally spoke. "Isn't the live round supposed to be equal time?" Harrison turned to him with polite condescension. "And it will be, Mr. Hale, if our third performer is prepared." Prepared. Malik stood up. He did it slowly, carefully, the way you stand when you understand that dignity is sometimes the only thing left fully under your control. "I'm prepared," he said. His voice wasn't loud. But it landed. Harrison smiled without warmth. "I'm sure you think so." Then he left. Silence lingered behind him. Olivia stared at the floor. Preston exhaled and muttered, "That was messed up." Malik didn't answer. He sat back down, placed both palms flat against his knees, and stared at the music in his lap until the notes blurred. You might think this is where he should have exploded, called someone racist, walked out, demanded fairness, but anger is expensive when you're the one with something to lose. And Malik had been raised by people who understood that sometimes surviving humiliation requires strategy, not noise. So he waited, but the night kept finding new ways to corner him. A little after 8:15, while trying to get water from a service station near the wing curtains, Malik accidentally overheard two donors talking just beyond a partition. "I heard the anonymous submission this year was extraordinary," one woman said. "Apparently Harrison himself told the board it was the best in a decade," the man replied. "Who is it?" "No idea. But if it's one of those private academy kids, Belmont will market the life out of him." Malik froze, the anonymous submission. First light, so Harrison Vale had admired the music when he didn't know who created it. That realization didn't comfort Malik. It hurt in a sharper way. Because it confirmed something ugly and old. There were people willing to love what came from you while despising *you. That was clue number one, not yet public, not yet useful, but true. Minutes later came the fourth escalation. A volunteer from social media wandered backstage filming candid atmosphere clips for Belmont's accounts. She turned the phone toward Preston. Toward Olivia, then toward Malik and paused. "Can you hold the folder lower?" she asked. "We're trying to keep the visual aesthetic consistent." Visual aesthetic. Even humiliation had branding now. Malik lowered the folder. Then, as if that weren't enough, another staff member approached him with a stain removal cloth. "There's lint on your shoulder." Here, she brushed at him briskly, not cruelly, but carelessly like he was a prop being corrected before use. Malik stepped back. "I got it." Something flashed in her face, surprised that he had boundaries. Again, small moment, easy to dismiss, but those moments pile up. They teach a room how to treat a person. By 8:30, the guest performer segment had stretched longer than expected. A jazz trio, then a donor speech, then a video montage about equity in the arts narrated by a celebrity voice. Malik sat through all of it from backstage. Imagine that. A room talking about equity while the kid who needed it most sat hidden behind a curtain because a powerful man decided he looked wrong. That contradiction would have almost been funny if it weren't so cruel. At 8:45, his phone buzzed. A message from Nia. "Did you play yet?" "Mom says I gotta sleep, but I'm pretending." Malik looked at the screen for a long second before answering, "Not yet." Soon, then he added a piano emoji because children deserve hope whenever possible. A minute later, Miss Evelyn finally arrived, breathless and furious in a dark church hat she had definitely worn on purpose. When she saw Malik's face, she knew immediately that something had happened. "What did they do?" she asked. He tried to brush it off. "Nothing." Miss Evelyn gave him the kind of look only elders can give, the one that says, "I survived eras you only read about. Do not insult me with small lies." "What did they do, baby?" And quietly, without dramatics, Malik told her. Not every detail, just enough. By the time he finished, Miss Evelyn's jaw had set like carved stone. She did not storm into the ballroom. That would have satisfied anger, not protected Malik. Instead, she touched his cheek and said, "Listen to me. Their confusion is not your identity." "You hear me?" He nodded. "You were invited because of the work, not because they did you a favor. So when they call you, you walk out there like the room has finally caught up." A lesser mentor would have said, "Prove them wrong." Miss Evelyn knew better. No. Walk out there like the room has caught up. That difference matters, because Malik wasn't trying to become worthy in that moment. He already was. But before he could get to that stage, the night dropped him even lower. And this decision, made carelessly by people obsessed with optics, would nearly cost Belmont the very story it had come to celebrate. At 9 o'clock, Amelia rushed in with a strained face and a tablet she was gripping too hard. "We have a problem," she said. Nobody in rooms like that ever says asterisk problem unless they mean asterisk panic. The master of ceremonies had just announced an intermission extension because one of the board chairs wanted to revise the order again. Guests were drinking more, whispering more, watching less. The energy in the room had shifted from elegant to unstable. "What kind of problem?" Miss Evelyn asked. Amelia looked directly at Malik for the first time all evening. "Your signed performance authorization form isn't in the packet." Malik blinked. "I filled it out online. There was an e-signature field, but the final guardian verification page appears incomplete." Tasha. His mother had meant to finish it during her lunch break the day the email came, but the hospital had called her to a patient room. She must have thought she submitted it. Or maybe the system had glitched. Either way, now this woman was standing in front of Malik talking about paperwork while the biggest opportunity of his life slipped sideways. "What does that mean?" he asked. Amelia hesitated. "It means we can't put a minor on stage until it's resolved." Miss Evelyn stepped forward. "I am his teacher. His mother is on the way." "I understand, but the legal team..." "Legal team?" Miss Evelyn snapped. "Y'all didn't have a legal team when that man humiliated him at the front door." Amelia flinched. Because it was true, rules have a way of becoming urgent only when they protect power. Malik felt a sudden rush of dizziness, not physical exactly. More like the floor beneath the evening had given way. All this time he had been telling himself, "Stay calm, stay ready, just get to the piano." Now even that seemed uncertain. Miss Evelyn made 3 quick calls, no answer from Tasha, straight to voicemail. Again. Again. Daniel Ruiz appeared in the doorway, reading the room at a glance. "What happened?" Amelia answered first. "Authorization issue." Daniel's expression darkened. "Now," she said nothing because yes, now. And then, as if the night had not taken enough, Harrison Vale walked in and caught only the final fragments. "Is there still an issue?" he asked coolly. Miss Evelyn turned so sharply her hat shifted. "Yes, there is, a major one." Harrison ignored her and addressed Amelia. "We can't keep delaying. If paperwork is incomplete, disqualify and move on." Malik's head lifted. The room went still. There are moments in life when cruelty stops hiding behind manners. This was one of them. Miss Evelyn spoke first, voice low and dangerous. "Say that again?" Harrison's smile returned, thin as paper. "I said if requirements weren't met, we proceed with the qualified finalists. That's standard." No, Miss Evelyn said. Standard would have been letting the invited child in through the front door. Olivia, who had been quiet for most of the night, whispered, "She's right." Preston didn't whisper. "This is ridiculous." Harrison turned to them with polished patience, but his eyes were harder now. Young artists would do well to understand that professionalism matters as much as talent. Malik felt that one land in his ribs, not because it was true, because it was designed to sound true. To people who hadn't been there, to people who wanted an explanation cleaner than prejudice. And that is how power often works. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simply rewords injustice into policy. For the first time all evening, Malik looked Harrison directly in the eyes, not angrily, steadily. "I did what I was told," he said. "I came when the email said, I brought the score, I'm ready to play." Harrison held that gaze for 1 second too long. Something in it unsettled him. Maybe the calm, maybe the absence of pleading. Maybe the fact that Malik wasn't acting like somebody seeking permission. But Harrison recovered quickly. "Then perhaps," he said, "you should have ensured the adults responsible for you were equally prepared." There it was. The insult widened, no longer just about Malik, now about his mother too. A few hours earlier, Tasha had been changing a dressing on an elderly patient whose own children hadn't visited in months. She had skipped dinner, worked extra shifts, and rushed across the city in hospital scrubs so her son wouldn't walk into this alone. And this man, this silk-voiced stranger, had just reduced all of that to incompetence. Malik's throat tightened, not because he wanted to cry. Because sometimes protecting your dignity means swallowing emotion so hard it hurts. Daniel stepped forward half a pace. "Mr. Vale, maybe this isn't helping." Harrison's chin lifted. "Security is not needed for this conversation." "I wasn't offering security," Daniel said. That line hung in the room like a warning. Harrison left soon after, but the damage stayed. For 10 whole minutes, nobody knew whether Malik would perform. He sat alone in a stairwell just beyond backstage because it was the only place without fluorescent chatter and pitying eyes. The concrete was cool behind him. Somewhere below, a service door opened and shut. Above, music from the ballroom filtered down in muffled fragments. He placed the leather folder beside him and stared at his hands. They looked small. Too small for the night, too small for all the pressure, too small to hold the future everyone kept talking about. And in that stairwell, for one quiet, awful moment, Malik questioned himself. Not his music, himself. Maybe Harrison was right about one thing, he thought. Maybe people like them were supposed to enter rooms like this unless invited twice. Maybe excellence wasn't enough if you wore it in the wrong body, came from the wrong block, spoke too softly, arrived by train instead of chauffeur. That is what humiliation does when it sits long enough. It starts trying to rewrite your internal voice. But then he heard footsteps. Miss Evelyn sat beside him without asking permission. For a while she said nothing, just breathed with him. Then she asked, "Do you know why they bother me so much?" Malik didn't answer. "Because I've seen this room before," she said. "Different wallpaper, same spirit." He turned slightly. "When I was 19, I was good enough to audition for a conservatory in North Carolina," she continued. "Teacher told me I had hands made for choppin'. You know what the registrar said when my mama brought me in wearing her department store Sunday dress? Said the program might not be the best cultural fit." She laughed once without humor. "Cultural fit." Malik looked at her fully now. "I went home and cried until my eyelashes stuck together. Then I got up and taught myself not to hand my worth to people who liked Gates more than music." She nudged his shoulder gently. "Baby, if you let tonight tell you who you are, then that man has beaten more than your moment. He's beaten your mind." Silence. Then she asked very softly, "Do you trust what God put in your hands?" Malik swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you trust the work?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let these people worry about their paperwork. You worry about the first note." The first note, something steadied inside him, not victory but center. What neither of them knew was that, while they sat in that stairwell, 3 things were happening at once. First, Daniel Ruiz was reviewing the arrival table logs and had found Malik's original credential packet, misplaced not randomly, but inside a folder marked for donor-host review. On top of that folder was Harrison Vale's handwritten note, "Verify before stage access." Second, Amelia was looking at the judges' scoring summaries from the blind preliminary round. and realizing the anonymous submission code attached to the highest score in 12 years was the same code on Malik's file. And third, out in the ballroom, one of the faculty judges, Dr. Simone Hayes, a nationally respected pianist and composer, had just asked why she had not yet heard finalist number 3. The room was about to change, slowly at first, then all at once. Dr. Simone Hayes was not the kind of woman people casually ignored. She had built a career from precision. Her performances were disciplined, her interviews thoughtful, her standards legendary. She had grown up in New Orleans, trained in Boston, and spent enough time in elite rooms to recognize when somebody was using professionalism as camouflage for bias. So when the schedule stretched past reason and finalist number 3 had still not appeared, she stopped smiling politely. From her table near the stage, she called Amelia over. "Where is the Carter boy?" Amelia tried to answer carefully. "There's an authorization issue being resolved." Dr. Hayes set down her glass. "Resolved by whom? Administration. Not music faculty. No, ma'am, that was all Dr. Hayes needed." Within minutes, she was backstage with the program director, the head judge, and 2 board members whose discomfort rose noticeably with each step away from the donors. Malik had just returned from the stairwell when the group entered. Dr. Hayes saw him, took in the suit, the folder, the composure, the fatigue around the eyes, and then turned to Amelia. "This is the finalist. Yes, and he has not performed because—" Amelia looked at Harrison, who had arrived just behind them. There it was again, the chain of deference. Harrison answered before she could. "We encountered discrepancies. For everyone's protection, I recommended we delay until matters were clarified." Dr. Hayes's gaze sharpened. "Recommended to whom?" No answer. The program director cleared his throat. "There may have been a minor administrative mishandling. Was he selected as a finalist?" she asked. "Yes." "Was he invited to perform tonight?" "Yes." "Has any evidence been presented that this child is not who he says he is?" Silence. Dr. Hayes looked at Malik then. "Did you bring your score?" He handed her the folder. She flipped it open. The first page of asterisk first light was there in neat notation with revisions in pencil. In the corner of the final page was a small copied fragment from Isaiah's original notebook, noted as asterisk motif source. Father's sketch reworked. Dr. Hayes's eyes moved quickly. Then she looked up. "What was the opening voicing in measure 4 before revision?" she asked suddenly. Malik answered without hesitation. "Second inversion E-flat major with the B-flat doubled too hard." It sounded crowded, so I opened the left hand. A tiny smile touched one corner of Dr. Hayes's mouth. "What tempo did you submit in preliminary recording?" 72, but I wanted a little freer live." The head judge, Leonard Bishop, leaned closer. Dr. Hayes asked one more question. "What's the emotional image behind the bridge?" Malik took a breath. "The part when the sun is up, but the city's not all the way awake yet. Like hope got there before people did?" Nobody in that room mistook the answer. This was his music, his mind, his work. Dr. Hayes closed the folder and turned slowly toward Harrison Vale. "Inconveniencing this finalist any further," she said, "would be an embarrassment to Belmont." Harrison's face shifted, only slightly, but the first crack was there. He tried once more. "Simone, with respect, there are governance concerns." "With respect," she interrupted, "I have judged competitions on 3 continents. I know the difference between governance and cowardice." Complete silence. Amelia looked like she wanted the floor to open. Daniel stood at the door, arms folded. Miss Evelyn said nothing at all. She didn't need to. Then the head judge added, voice dry as paper, "For the record, submission code 117, the highest preliminary score this year is Mr. Carter, S." Preston inhaled sharply. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. Amelia closed her eyes for half a second. She knew in that instant the night had already crossed into consequence. Harrison looked genuinely confused now. "The highest?" "Yes," Bishop said. "Unanimous." And if only Harrison had known that truth an hour earlier, he would never have said what came next, because he made one last mistake. He gave a strained little laugh and said, "Well, then I suppose we're all eager to hear whether the live performance matches the mythology." Mythology. There it was again. That need to diminish what he had just learned. Dr. Hayes stared at him as if filing away every syllable. Then she turned to Malik. "Can you play?" Malik looked at the stage entrance. He thought of his mother in traffic, Nia pretending not to sleep, Miss Evelyn in the stairwell, his father's notebook, the door, the words, the waiting, and then he answered. "Yes, ma'am." Out in the ballroom, the MC returned to the microphone with a smile too bright to be genuine. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Our final Langston Fellowship performance will begin now." Conversation dimmed, glasses lowered, napkins settled. And somewhere near the back of the hall, just as Malik took his first step toward the stage, Tasha Carter slipped through the side doors, still wearing hospital scrubs under a borrowed coat. Chest heaving, eyes searching desperately through a room built to make people like her feel small. She saw her son and stopped breathing, because he was already walking toward the piano. The walk to the stage felt longer than the hallway had any right to be. Malik could hear the room before he fully saw it, the restless shifting of donors in their chairs, the rustle of formal wear. The faint clink of a glass set down too carefully, murmurs moving table to table as people registered the sight of him. Some recognized him from the entrance, some from the backstage confusion. Some didn't know anything except that the final performer was a boy in a slightly too big suit and serious eyes, walking alone toward a Steinway worth more than most cars in the parking garage. At table 9, Harrison Vale sat very still. At the back, Tasha pressed one hand to her mouth. Miss Evelyn remained standing near the curtain with both hands clasped, not in anxiety now, but in faith. Malik reached the piano bench and paused. Present tense takes over here because this is the moment. He sits, he adjusts the bench once, not nervously, precisely. He places the folder down but does not open it. He doesn't need it. The piece lives in him now. The hall is vast, golden, cold with expectation. For 1/2 second he sees it all. The chandelier light on polished wood, the rows of faces, the judges, the donors, the man who told him he did not belong. Then he lowers his hands. And the first note rings, not loudly, cleanly, pure enough to make the entire room lean forward. It is followed by a second note, then a third, and already something impossible is happening inside that ballroom. The social performance of the evening, status, wealth, small talk, strategic smiles, begins to fall away under the weight of real beauty. Because First Light is not the kind of piece that asks permission. It opens like a hesitant dawn, sparse, searching, almost fragile. The melody steps forward carefully as if unsure whether the world is safe yet. Left hand low and steady, right hand lifting hope in increments. Then comes the first swell, not showmanship, feeling. The kind of playing that makes people forget to evaluate because they are too busy remembering. Olivia starts crying before she realizes it. Preston, who has spent years around conservatory talent, stops comparing and starts listening. One older donor lowers his head. At the judge's table, Dr. Hayes's expression changes from professional interest to something deeper. Recognition. Not of a person she's met before, but of that rare moment when craft and truth arrive in the same breath. Malik keeps playing, and now the room enters the story with him. They can hear the mornings he woke too early, the buses groaning outside cracked apartment windows, his mother's exhaustion. Nia's laughter, Miss Evelyn's lessons, Isaiah's unfinished notes becoming whole, the loneliness, the restraint, the things he swallowed and transformed instead of returning in kind. This is what powerful people often forget. Talent does not only come from privilege, sometimes it comes from pressure. Sometimes grace is forged in rooms that never expected to produce brilliance. Midway through the piece, Malik shifts into the bridge. The tempo loosens, hope enters without apology. A gospel color touches the harmony, not enough to become cliché, just enough to reveal where he comes from without asking anyone's permission to approve it. The melody rises, falls, hesitates, rises again. It sounds like somebody finding faith while still carrying pain. At the back of the room, Tasha sinks into an empty chair because her knees can't hold her anymore. She is crying openly now, not just because her son is playing beautifully. Because she knows what it cost him to become this calm. Because she has spent years praying that one day the world would see what she saw, because she almost missed it. And at table 9, Harrison Vale finally understands that this is no charity anecdote, no diversity optics moment, no lucky child with one good trick. This is mastery arriving in a body he dismissed. His expression changes in stages, first confusion, then discomfort, Then that unmistakable flicker of self-recognition people get when the truth turns and points directly at them. His jaw tightens. Shoulders stiffen. One hand stills on the stem of his glass. By the time Malik reaches the final movement, the entire ballroom is silent, not polite silence, surrendered silence. He plays the closing progression slower than in rehearsal, letting each chord breathe. The final motif, drawn from Isaiah's old notebook, returns transformed. What began incomplete now resolves with quiet authority, truth before volume. The last note lingers, then disappears, and for a single suspended heartbeat nobody moves, silence. Complete absolute silence. Then it happens, a gasp somewhere near the front, a chair scraping back. Applause starting in one corner and then exploding across the room so suddenly it feels almost physical. Not courteous clapping, people rising, turning. Looking at one another as if to confirm what they had just witnessed. At the judge's table, Leonard Bishop stands first. Then Dr. Simone Hayes, then half the room, a standing ovation. Malik doesn't smile right away. He just sits there breathing, hands still hovering near the keys as if the piece is not finished leaving him. Then the MC, visibly shaken, returns to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stops because the applause hasn't ended. When it finally does, Dr. Hayes takes the microphone herself. "That composition," she says, voice resonant and steady, "was written by tonight's finalist Malik Carter, age 13. More applause. She continues. "It was also the highest-scoring blind submission Belmont Conservatory has received in 12 years. The room erupts again. Harrison Vale does not clap. He cannot. Not because he disapproves anymore, because he is trapped inside the memory of his own voice at the front door. You do not belong here. Dr. Hayes is not finished. What you just heard, she says, is why blind judging matters, because excellence does not always arrive packaged in ways power expects. Now the applause becomes something else. Not just appreciation, recognition, public recognition. And then Leonard Bishop steps up with the official folder. By unanimous decision, he announces, Malik Carter is the recipient of the Langston Young Artists Fellowship with full tuition mentorship. And a special composition development grant. Tasha lets out a sound that is half sob, half laugh. Miss Evelyn closes her eyes. Daniel Ruiz, standing at the side, nods once to himself like a man who has seen justice arrive late but not fail entirely. Then Bishop adds one final detail, almost casually, but it lands like a verdict. For transparency, I should note that the preliminary scoring summary praising First Light as the future of American composition was signed during donor review by Mr. Harrison Vale himself. Now the room actually turns, every eye, every witness, every person who had heard or seen or participated in the earlier mistreatment, toward Harrison, and there it is. The full realization, color draining from his face, mouth parting slightly, shoulders losing structure. The exquisite horror of a powerful man understanding in public that he has not merely been unkind. He has been exposed. He praised the work. He insulted the child. He honored excellence in theory and rejected it in person. No speech could defend that contradiction. Malik finally stands. The applause comes again. This time he looks out and sees his mother. Their eyes meet. And in that look is everything the room can't fully understand. Nights without enough, years without guarantees, grief, discipline, church keys, bus rides, fear, faith. And 1,000 private sacrifices nobody in evening wear had bothered to imagine. Malik doesn't gloat, that matters. He doesn't point at Harrison, doesn't smirk, doesn't weaponize the moment. He simply nods once to the audience, once to the judges, and once, very slightly, to Miss Evelyn. Dignity intact, justice complete, or almost complete. Because what happened after the applause would determine whether Belmont wanted a performance or a reckoning. Consequences are quieter, but sometimes they are more important. The reception after the award announcement was supposed to be elegant, controlled, strategic. It was. Too many people had seen too much. Conversations changed shape immediately. Donors who had smiled through the earlier confusion now looked uneasy. Staff members replayed the entrance exchange in whispers. One volunteer admitted there was video. From the lobby, from backstage. From the moment Malik had been redirected away from the main doors. And once a room starts telling the truth, power gets very nervous. Belmont's executive director approached Tasha personally, apologized for the evening, and asked to schedule a formal meeting. Tasha, still emotional and still in scrubs, answered with the clarity of a tired mother who has no time for polished nonsense. "You don't need a meeting to know what happened," she said. "You need the courage to name it." Miss Evelyn nearly smiled. Amelia found Malik near the side corridor afterward, where he was finally eating half a dinner roll and a piece of cold chicken because adrenaline had worn off and hunger returned all at once. "I'm sorry," she said. This time she meant it. Malik looked at her quietly. She continued, "I saw what was happening. I kept telling myself I was just following process. I should have stepped in sooner." He nodded once. "Okay." Not absolution, just acknowledgement, because maturity is knowing an apology can be sincere and still insufficient. Preston came over next and stuck out his hand. "You were the best thing in the room tonight." Olivia hugged Tasha before asking permission and told Malik she wanted the sheet music one day. Dr. Hayes did something more significant. She asked Malik if he had more originals. He blinked. "A few." "Keep writing," she said. "The world does not need you to become a copy of anybody. It needs you to become more yourself." For a boy like Malik, that sentence was almost too large to hold. Meanwhile, Harrison Vale had disappeared from the ballroom for nearly 20 minutes. When he returned, he walked differently. Less like a man managing an event, more like a man walking through the debris of his own assumptions. He approached Tasha first, not Malik. That was telling. Adults like him often apologize to the parent because it feels safer than facing the child directly. "Ms. Carter," he began, voice stripped of its earlier confidence, "I owe you and your son an apology." Tasha looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "you do," he swallowed. "What I said at the entrance was wrong, and my actions afterward only made it worse." Still, she said nothing, so he turned to Malik. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," he said. "There is no excuse for that." Malik met his eyes. The entire scene could have become sentimental here. Easy, cheap. The kind of forgiveness fantasy audiences are often fed because it comforts everyone too quickly. But real dignity is more complicated than that. Malik answered in the same tone he had used all night, quiet, steady, clear. "You didn't have to know me to treat me right." Harrison had no reply. That line stayed with everyone who heard it. Because it was the whole story in one sentence. By Monday morning, Belmont's board had announced an internal review of gala conduct and access procedures. Within a week, Harrison Vale stepped down from his chairmanship of the Youth Fellowship Committee, pending institutional reforms. Local arts blogs got hold of the story, then city outlets. Then national culture pages picked it up as an example of exactly why blind evaluation and equity reform still mattered. The video from the lobby leaked too. No shouting, no slurs, just tone. Expression, direction, dismissal. Sometimes that is more damning. People could watch the whole machinery of assumption in real time. Harrison's public statement was carefully written, but the damage to his reputation was real. More importantly, Belmont was forced to confront the difference between celebrating opportunity and actually practicing it. As for Malik, the changes came fast. He began fellowship classes that summer with full tuition and transportation covered. Belmont arranged access to practice rooms, a digital piano for home use, and composition coaching twice a month. Dr. Hayes took personal interest in his writing. One regional orchestra requested permission to workshop First Light for a youth showcase. But the most meaningful moment came 3 weeks after the gala, back at New Mercy Baptist. A new upright piano had been donated to the church music room anonymously. Miss Evelyn knew immediately who had helped make that happen. Malik denied everything. Tasha just smiled. Nia wrote a sign in glitter marker and taped it above the bench. Malik's famous piano room, no touching unless invited, Miss Evelyn added, underneath in smaller handwriting. Everybody belongs where God gives them purpose. And for the first time in a long while, the Carter apartment held another different silence. Not fear, not even hope, relief. Sometimes the people we underestimate are the very people carrying the deepest discipline. Sometimes what looks ordinary to a careless eye is actually excellence still waiting for the right room. And sometimes the greatest exposure is not when the hidden gift is revealed, but when prejudice is forced to stand beside the truth and look small. Because let's be honest, this story was never just about one rude sentence at a gala. It was about a pattern, The pattern of assuming that polish equals worth, that wealth equals culture. That a child from the wrong neighborhood must be out of place in rooms built to discuss greatness. It was about how quickly people trust appearances, and how slowly some institutions learn that talent is not born with a dress code. But it was also about something stronger than all of that. Restraint, preparation, dignity. Malik didn't win because he argued harder. He won because when the moment finally came, he was ready, ready in skill, ready in spirit, ready in character. That matters because justice is satisfying, yes, but justice paired with grace, that's unforgettable. And maybe that's the part that stays with you after the applause fades, not the humiliation. Not even the exposure, but the image of a boy who was told he did not belong and answered not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth so beautiful the whole room had to rise. If only more people understood that respect should never require proof. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity matters, that truth still has power, and that the people the world overlooks often carry something extraordinary, then consider subscribing for more stories like this. These are the stories that deserve to be told, and they deserve to be told with heart. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever walked into a room and felt people decide your worth before you spoke, I hope you remember Malik Carter the next time doubt tries to name you. Because sometimes the first note changes everything, and this story of justice, it's only the beginning. Because what happened when a quiet woman in work boots walked into a courtroom where nobody expected her to speak well, that story might make this one feel gentle. Until next time.